So, Nikita, it's really good to be here. To all of you, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here to watch this live because we have a really nice conversation planned for you. In fact, being Nikita's editor, I think I had a lot of questions that I want to ask her during the process, but I kind of stuck to, the editing bit of it. And I thought I'll use this platform to ask you a lot of those questions now. So, Nikita, before we start, do you want to hold up the book and show everyone what the cover looks like? I think it's fabulous. It's so lovely. I mean, I know this was a long journey to get to this cover, and I'm so pleased about how it's turned out.
Yeah, same. I know we had I don't know, 8 months of back and forth. Like from
Yeah,
the
yeah,
initial idea to like this cover.
exactly.
Saw so many covers, so many different
Yeah.
stages. But then
Yeah,
we got here.
sometimes I think about how it'll be so great to kind of show readers the process from what the
Yeah.
cover supposedly looked like right in the beginning to what it actually turned out in print. It's such a you hold up the cover, and a lot of people who are going to be watching this are your existing fans and readers, and I feel like one of the things that they would have noticed about this cover that really stands out, it is that it's so different from everything that you've done before, everything that's come before this. You've had lovely covers throughout, but the aesthetic has just changed completely. But it's not just the aesthetics, right? Like, it's also what's inside the book. And I think one of the questions I want to start off with is that journey. I mean, not just in terms of how the book looks on the outside, but also what it
Mhm.
contains on the inside, and your own journey as a writer and how it's kind of changed from when you started back, I think in 2011, which was the first time I think you published. And it's been 10 years, and in 10 years you've kind of grown completely as a writer to a very different format from where you were right in the beginning. So if we just talk about just how that's been, and why you are here now, and what it was like to start then. So just in terms of how you've grown, what motivated you to kind of move towards this style, and what have you carried from those books all the way
Yeah.
to this? What has stayed the same? I think that's also something that's very interesting to know. What have you held dear, and what's been at the core of your writing? Do you want to
So
start off?
when I wrote my first book, that was December of 2010, and then the book came out April of 2011, which is this year was the 10th year um,
Yeah.
of that first book, and then there's been 12 ever since. This is my 13th, and a lot has changed. I never like set out to with a plan to write a dozen books. Like, that was never the plan, because then I would never have been
Yeah.
able to do it. It was just the one story that I had, and I wrote it, and then it did well. I was 19, and I was like, great, let's write another one. And then that's how it ended up happening. And in the first 2 years that I published 6 books, and then after that I kind of slowed down to one book a year. And then last year was the only time that I didn't come out with a book. But all through these years, I think in the very beginning, I was affected by what people were saying, and then I would absorb it like subconsciously. In my conscious mind, I would be like, oh no, I'll do what I want to do. And I convinced myself that I'm writing what I want to write, but it wasn't true, because it really, those kinds of like comments kind of like live in your subconscious, and you
Yeah.
don't even know it.
Yeah.
It took me a lot of time and effort, like active energy, to shed that, to actually stop caring. And I think uh becoming it's like people always talk about the art as though it's sacred and all that stuff, which, sure, but at the same time you also have to pay your bills. So
Yeah.
I think for me, when I became financially independent of my books, that's
Hmm.
when I was like, okay, now actually I can do a
What
hundred
you want
percent
to?
what I want to do, because
Yeah.
I was doing it like slowly. You've been my editor for a few years, and then I've been with Harper for 5 books. And
Yeah.
from that first book to this one, there's been changes that have been happening in the actual text, but the cover is something that, because it's a part of those three of those books were a part of the
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
So they all look similar, and then they go
Hmm.
together, which is like, those are all beautiful covers. But then the packaging also establishes in people's mind what the book is going to be about, because people
Yeah.
do that, judge a book by the cover, and I do
Yeah.
too. Like, everybody does to a certain extent. You do.
Hmm.
So changes have been happening slowly. Last year was the first time that I actually took pause in my writing. It wasn't intentional. I was trying really hard to write, but with the creative process, you really don't have control over it, which is another reason that I love having a job, because then I do have control over that. And then
Yeah.
that gives me like a feeling of, satisfaction and like fulfillment. So anyway, last year I couldn't really write, and I had only been writing these like audio stories, so just
Hmm.
short stories that were released in audio formats, and I was
Yeah.
really enjoying it. And when I was in New York doing my master's, I had written many short stories in my
Hmm.
thesis and all those things. So I took some of them, and I was just thinking about all these things about the secret inner lives of people who nobody knows. Especially for me, even with my writing, I felt like people claim to know you because they read all these words that came from your head. But then
Right.
my books were not reflective of my life. And books tend to be like tied into like a nice little bow, and it's all clean
Yeah.
edges, but it's not like uh, a real human being. So yeah, so just like a lot of ideas were floating around, and then I thought that maybe this is the way to go, maybe just do a collection of stories. And so I did.
While you were talking, I thought of something. I mean, there are a couple of things that you said that I wanted to talk about. One is the first thing, you edited your own book. That's something that must have been tough. I mean, how was that? Is my first question. But the second is more to do with what you talked about, the idea of packaging, about the fact that despite the fact that from the first book in the trilogy to the third one, things were very, I mean, they were completely different books. And in terms of, just as I remember working on the third one, The Reason Is You, and it was a very in terms of layers and in terms of the emotions, it was very different from the previous one. But the idea of you being a type of author, like you're writing romances, you're writing for a certain readership, etc. There's a sort of typecasting, or sort of like box that people put you in. And I think not just in terms of the covers and the packaging, but also in terms of the
Mhm.
expectation that the reader has from your book. When someone picks up a copy, they think they're getting a type of thing. And I feel like, while of course that's one thing, the one way to look at it is, yes, it is a box. Another way to also look at it is as a safe space, right? It's something that's safe, and that and you've done and you've been there before. And just to kind of break out of it, especially for a writer who sells in the thousands, and you're known for a kind of book, how difficult was it for yourself also to kind of talk to yourself about, you talked about the financial situation also, like in the sense that constraints that come, but that, even if you remove that from the equation, because you have a job and you're kind of now writing for the pleasure of it, even then, to kind of think about all the readers, all the expectations, all the what people are wanting from you, and then to give them something new and lovely and beautiful, but also different from what you've been doing. Was that
Yeah.
scary? Was that something that you had to kind of, did it come naturally, or was that something that you had to kind of navigate within your head before you put it to on paper?
I think it's because I took a break last year from publishing. Um, it was easy. I think it
Okay.
was my most recent book, The Reason Is You, which you also edited, was
Hmm.
also dealing with mental health and
Yeah.
loss and grief, and how society sees it, and how somebody who is in it, experiencing it like secondhand, because this
Hmm.
person was witnessing his partner go through it. So we were talking about that, and then this book just like embraced it more, and then was more obviously about that, versus the
Yeah.
other one was still a love story, and it was still about other things too. Like there were other prevalent themes that were more like romantic relationships. They were not just one theme. So I think it was gradual, and then taking a year off really just helped, because then I could actually shed like my first 12 books in
Yeah.
that sense, because then if you're on that train, and if you're going, then you keep going on the same path. But
Yeah.
that I had fully stopped, and I
Yeah. So that
restarted.
inertia wasn't there, at least in terms of just moving forward. And yeah,
Yeah,
I get what you mean, because
exactly. And with Harper,
if you do it in
when
a
I
flow,
first
you have to kind of stick.
okay, you were pausing.
Sorry, I'm not sure if people are being able to figure this out, but I have an internet issue going on in the sense that it keeps going and coming. So I hope I'm not dropping off in the middle. But if I do, you can, I think Amazon India, I think we've got Deepak still with us. If you could drop me a message, and I'll try and fix my internet situation. So Nikita, I mean, yes, okay. So in terms of just, movement, I'm glad that pause sort of helped you. I think any kind of pause always helps you look back and kind of change track a little more easily
Yeah.
than if you're just in that flow. But okay, so I talked about how certain things still, you've got a stamp on your writing, a kind of style that's your personal sort of trademark, which I think has stayed despite all the other changes. The subject matter, the way,
Mhm.
the what you're writing about, and the way you're writing it has changed. But I think what's remained is, there's a certain empathy and a certain kind of pragmatic, real sort of approach to the way you tell stories. So in terms of, I remember, talking about this right in the beginning when I read your first manuscript of your previous book, which was The Reason Is You.
Mhm.
Just the dialogues and the way that, I remember there was a scene of a couple fighting. I mean, the main characters in that book fighting, and I
Mhm.
remember thinking, this is very real. This is real to the point that I felt like, I mean, did this happen? Is this just directly taken from, because dialogues are so tough to write, especially dialogues
Yeah.
which, are supposed to be in the flow, either an angry conversation or a romantic conversation. It just becomes stilted when you're putting it on paper. But I think there's something about the way you approach writing them that comes from a place of empathy, and it just reflects on paper. So I feel like that has stayed the same. And
I think that's
so,
exactly what I was going to say when you said
yeah,
what has stayed the same all through the years. I think it's the dialogues. I mean,
yeah.
not to brag, but I'm very good at dialogues. I've
No,
been
I mean, that's the first thing
um,
I noticed about. I mean, I remember talking to you about it and talking to, my publisher about it, and saying the dialogues are so close to
yeah.
reality that it's almost eerie
And
in
I've
its.
like kept them all from the beginning. Like I don't go back and reread my books, but I'm sure that if I did, I would not be, like you look back at what you did 10 years ago, and then you're
Yeah,
like,
and
oh,
you're a little like,
kind of crazy. But like if I read the dialogues, I would be like, oh, I could still write this. I could still be writing this right now, because I
yeah,
just it's just like naturally been that way for me, dialogues. And I people try to be more pretentious, or like wanting to be, okay, my writing is, so I tried to keep that limited to the narration and the actual like format and form and all those different
hmm,
things. But the
hmm,
dialogue should always be fluid. They should always just be conversational. Just
yeah,
because you're gonna call your book literary or commercial, that shouldn't
hmm,
dictate how people talk. Like,
yeah,
so that's like something actually I also it was pointed out to me by a teacher in my master's program. She was like saying that if you should just sit somewhere and then watch people talk, or like whenever,
hmm,
even in TV shows or whatever you're doing, you just watch
hmm,
how people talk, they move, it's not just like words. Nobody talks in perfect paragraphs and like stuff like that. And that's what
exactly,
like pulls you out of a book when you're reading something and it's like perfect long speeches and like no one's interrupting them and
exactly,
like all those things. So
exactly.
yeah, I have studied that a little bit, like just watching people. And
I mean, that's a great tip, because I remember thinking about this when, people are talking. I mean, we're talking right now, and there's so many of these pauses and overlap sentences, and, words kind of flowing into each other. But to put that perfectly on paper, it takes it, because that also can't come off as rehearsed. Like, even when you're kind of writing shorter sentences or
Mhm.
trying to mimic how real life is, it's
Mhm.
difficult to do that. So, I mean, that's something that I think you're definitely right. It has stayed the same. And the other thing that I want to talk about is format, right? Like, in the sense that what you
Yeah.
used to write once upon a time was straight up novels from the beginning to end. You're writing these, contained stories, which, like you said, are neatly kind of tied up and then slowly you started moving towards the messy reality of life. So, like, like you talk about in Reason Is You, there's the idea of mental health challenges that are messier than just a heartbreak or just, a breakup,
Mhm.
etc. Like that kind of stuff, you can close in this, closed loop sort of thing. But as
Mhm.
life gets messier, it gets more difficult to kind of capture it in words. And I feel like in short stories that's even harder. So I want to know how it was to kind of inhabit the spaces that you've created in these stories. So, just writing short stories, you kind of need to dive into a situation and then inhabit all these characters, think about all these situations, and then get out of it and then completely inhabit a completely different set of characters and situations. How much time, how what over what time? I mean, I know this answer, but I want the readers to also know it. What was the kind of time frame within which you wrote these stories, from the first one, maybe the oldest one, to the newest one in the collection? And also, what was the process like, and how different was it from writing the novels, which is your primary format?
Um, the process was very different because with my novels, I usually don't start writing until I have the full story, and then I would sit down. And I really, the big difference between writing a novel and a short story collection I've found is with the novels, it's about the characters. You have to 100% know everything that this person will do and won't do and how they would react in any given situation. You just really have to know all the characters completely.
Yeah,
uh, with a short story collection, it's much easier in that sense because you don't have to know the characters. You just have to think about one scene, just
yeah.
one scene, and then you put like interesting people in there and then see what might happen, and then
Hmm.
how you got to that scene or how you go from that scene. You don't have to give them a full picture. So it's just think of it as like zooming into someone's life and then
Right.
zooming out. So it's like
I,
a moment
yeah.
in a time of their lives, and that's it.
Yeah.
With so when I in terms of like actual writing, with my novels, I would write them in 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks sometimes, because then I would only sit down once I have everything. So then I would
Okay.
sit down and I would write the first draft. And when I'm writing, I'm not really doing much more. I'm still working, but like not really that actively. I would find that time to
Right.
just focus on writing. With this one, it was like a little more turbulent because there were a lot of breaks. And then every story, I think I took 1 day or 2 days to write. So I
Okay.
would go sit down and like do the whole story, and then I would not sit back down for like a week, and then I would sit down again and then write another story. So
Right.
I sent them to you separately also, like in
Yeah.
clumps of 2 or 3,
Hmm.
because that's how I was writing. Because also I think the break was necessary. I know that we were on a deadline and then we were kept missing it, but at the same time it was like, if you have to come out of this and like fully like leave it and then go into something else, um, it's really, you want to make it sound different. It's all coming
Yeah.
from me, but it's all supposed to be in other people's heads, and these people are
Hmm.
so different from each other, and these stories are so different. Like all the characters are not the same age, not the same circumstances, not the same even geographic location and all of those things.
Right.
So I wanted the insides of their heads, those voices, to sound completely different. And I
Right.
think that's for that it was necessary to take those breaks. So I think for a short story collection, it did take a few months, maybe February through April or January to March. I don't remember
Okay.
exactly what it was. But
Right.
then whenever I would sit down to write, it was 1 or 2 days, and then I would leave. And then I would come
Okay.
back like a week later or something like that.
Okay.
So the actual writing time would be the same as writing a
But it's
novel,
just spread
but
over. Yeah,
yeah.
which makes sense, right? Because I mean, otherwise, one of the things that you just said was, all of them are different situations and different ages, and so of course, one of the things is to kind of go into it and then extract yourself and give yourself a little bit of a rest before you try to enter another,
Mhm.
another headspace as such. But I feel like one thing that I was curious about while I was editing also was the difference in the voices. One of the things that I definitely struggle with is also voices in stories, right? While editing, a lot of times you want to sound like different people, but it ends up sounding the same. That doesn't happen with you.
Mhm.
But what I was more curious about is, for a change from your previous books, you've written, I mean, the ages, the range of ages and the range of situations is just massive in this book. You've got, a very young kid, and you've got like much older people. You've got like an older couple. You've got young people. You've got middle-aged people. It's the range of age is huge, but also the range of situations they're in is, people coming from small towns, living completely different lives, divorced, and things. There's so many things. I just want to know, one, how do you kind of find the voice to tell the story of someone who is very young and very
Okay, so Swati is cutting out. Let me see. Okay, but I got your question, so I'm just going to
Yeah,
answer.
please.
um, so we were talking about voices. I think it's a similar question to when people ask me. I've written some books from a male point of view, and then they always ask me how you can do that being a woman and how you can do it correctly or do justice to it or something like that. And I always feel that um, I'm writing one book a year, but I'm reading many more books, and half of them are written by men, and half of them are written by, like, it's like it's not really about the gender. It's about what it's about the voice. So
Okay.
it really doesn't. Um, it's not that difficult because then I'm reading all these, like my bookshelf is filled with books written by people who are different genders and different age groups and all those things, and it doesn't feel awkward to read those books and then feel like, oh, I don't think this way, or because like people, it's about how that character thinks or how they feel and how they would react to something. It's not really about um, I guess I haven't had to actively work on that, so I don't have like a tip, but yeah, I think it's just reading a lot of books and being around
Yeah, and
people.
maybe do you
Basic.
think it has to do with, sorry, I think I did drop off in the middle, so that's why I've kind of moved to my phone internet. I hope that won't drop off. But yeah, so I mean, other than the idea of reading a lot, I think one of the things that maybe you're doing consciously or subconsciously, it feels like that might be is something like the dialogues bit that you talked about, which is observing, right? Like, so say
Mhm.
you're writing about people who are older than you, you're especially getting a kid's language and kids kind of tone right.
Mhm.
Someone who, and the kid that you've written about, yes, it is a precocious kid, which is, I think, a lot of times how kids are portrayed when they're written by adults, because you're writing a slightly older voice to a very young
Mhm.
kid. But the kid that you've written is not just precocious. I mean, he's the naughty sort of, sweet, naive sort of fellow, and it's really cute to sort of, the voice is really cute, but it's also real. So it feels like his real, authentic voice. And I think part of that also might be coming from observing life around you, to the point that it kind of observing and then sort of also taking it in. So do you think that's something you do as a writer? You just sort of, how it says everything's copy, like one of the big phrases of, journalism is that everything's copy. Do you think for a writer, everything's a story? Everything that you're observing, you're living through becomes, it feeds into the stories that you have to tell. Do you think that's something you'd agree with?
Yeah, like um if you observe things in real life, which I don't do actively, but you go out and you see people and you interact with people and then you absorb those things and then they become organically a part of your character. The kid that you're talking about, Tutu, is based on my cousin, but
Okay.
and he's the same age and he did the same thing one time, and not the whole story, but like one of the parts. So it was easy for me because I watched him grow up his whole life. So ever since he was like born to now he's 10. So I know how he would think or how he would act, but
Yeah.
that's not from like sitting there and watching him so that I would have copy. It's more about, just watching. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it also helps because when you think about a character, you also try to think about who that character reminds you of, and that was easier to do with this book because this book is uh, taken from different parts of my life. Also, it's not fully fiction. Like, yes, the stories are, but then the elements that appear are, some of them are taken from my life, so life experiences. So then it feels more organic that way to just like absorb and then
Yeah.
yeah. And
So,
compared to a
okay, so
novel, which is
we
actually.
you talked about that particular story, and I think this is a perfect kind of point to kind of go into the book and what it has.
Mhm.
One of the things that I think is new in this book, and that's something that new for you also, is the way you've sort of played around with format and played around with the way you tell the story. So you know how each of these stories has been told in the way that, in the format that it kind of fits it the best. So when you're writing about self-care, for example, and there's this woman who's writing about self-care, she's basically writing a blog, and you've written it in that sort of blog style way. or you've got another story here which is called Guru, which is, I mean, you've right, it's a story about, it's a letter written to, a teacher, so you've written it in the format of a letter. Similarly, you've got styles which really kind of push the envelope in terms of format and the way you tell the story. There's I mean, Real is another story that I think is done really
Mm-hmm.
well, because it kind of just is this monologue which doesn't stop at any point. It's sort of like, it's as if it's happening in someone's head. They're kind of, just talking and going on and on about something. So I feel like where was this idea of kind of pushing the envelope and experimenting with style and format coming from? What was the impetus? What made you kind of think about how you wanted to, not just what you want to write about, but how
Mm-hmm.
you want to write it?
Yeah, the form was an experiment for sure, and I really enjoyed it because then uh, that even helps make the stories sound different from each other, which is like
Yeah,
a thing that if you're putting out a collection of stories, then you want them to sound different and you want them uh, to sort of reflect what the story is about. So with Real, we did like the formatting was insane. I really like how it turned out because these are like these big like chunks with no paragraphs, and then um, so okay, so she this girl is sitting down and she's thinking about three things that are like wrong in her life, or she's working on, or she's fixing, or obsessed about, or whatever. So she thinks in the beginning, and like she would think this much about one thing, and then another thing, and then the third one, and then loop around. So then the loop becomes tighter and tighter. That was the idea, because then it was like a whole paragraph at first, and then it becomes like one sentence about this, and then this, and then this, and then comes back. And then in the end, it was like even in one sentence, she just thinks about all of these things together, and there's no punctuation other than periods, just like full stops. There's no punctuation at all. So then it feels claustrophobic. It feels like you're stuck in this spiral into someone's mind, and that's the claustrophobic feeling that I wanted to want it for this story. And then there's another story that I think the formatting was really tricky to figure out, but I really like, which was Anything. Because then this story we had these like blocks, like this one paragraph, and then
yeah,
um, so it's like scenes from, these are from the present and then these are from the past, and then the present was in first person. It was like I pretend to do this, and then the past is you. So
yeah,
she's talking about her whatever partner, and then every sentence in the I page starts with an I, or and every sentence starts with the you in the uh,
yeah.
adjacent page. And then that goes on for 10 scenes, and then something weird happens, so then it like kind of floats around, and
Breaks down. Yeah,
and then the last four scenes are italicized and they're about the future, so they may or may not
yeah.
have happened depending on whatever the reader wants to think. So that kind of stuff is so interesting to write, and I really had a lot of fun doing it, and I think that it helps set the stories apart from each other, make the characters like sound different because it feels like you're in their heads and experiencing
Yeah.
these things. So it was, honestly, it was just a lot of fun. That's why I did it.
I think that's probably what shows in the books. So when, I mean, people are going to be reading it and talking about the book. So I want to just say that I think one of the things that you will see is how, and this is something that always concerns me when we're talking about experimenting with form, that the form has to belong completely to the story. The story doesn't just, you don't just move around the story to fit the form that you're writing it in, but you kind of, it should be so organic that when you come away from the story, you feel like this is the only way it could have been written, and you don't feel like the form has sort of been thrust upon the story. And I feel like that's what's happened with these. So, which is why I know that there are stories which are written in the traditional way, in the sense that you've
Mhm.
written it in that beginning to end sort of way, which also it was a good sign to see that you weren't just kind of pushing the form to a different place just for the form, but
Yeah,
also because the
it
story
wasn't
fit,
written a certain way
just so
just to
that it
have
would
it
be.
that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. And I also, the one thing that I was worried about with some of these stories, the characters are like so vapid and unlikable, and I was like, people are going to think that it's me and I think this way. But then I really like, at that point I was like, I just have to trust that the reader is smart, and then
No, no, of
they
course.
realize that these are
Yeah.
all different stories, and because the characters are so diverse in how they think and who they are,
Yeah.
it's very clear that these are not stories about me, because how can one person be all these people?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
of course.
so
I mean,
there is that some.
I never did think that, honestly speaking, because I felt like this was where your writing was leading always. Maybe not to this particular, I mean, maybe not to this collection of short stories, but to this place where, you kind
Yeah.
of just decided to tackle uh, different things. And, I mean, in the end, this is also, I mean, this book is definitely about emotions, and it's just definitely about, relationships with yourself, with other people, with the world around you. In a way, you were writing about relationships before, and you're still writing about relationships now. The only difference is
Mhm.
that I think it stopped being the neat boy girl or romantic relationships of yore, and now it's about just the kind of relationships we're leading, we have with each other and with ourselves every day. So before I go to, I mean, I do want to add that we're gonna near our the end of our conversation, and if you've got questions, I think we have got a few questions that we will
Mhm.
be addressing, that Nikita will.
Okay, Swati dropped off again. Um, okay, there
Yeah.
you
Hi. I
go. I
think.
can't hear you. Sorry.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
I think there is some connectivity issue on Swati's end.
So
Mhm.
I'm so sorry, I keep dropping off. I just my net goes from the 4G to the Wi-Fi connection, and every time it switches,
Yeah.
it drops off. And if I switch off the Wi-Fi, it's just going to be patchy. So sorry, Nikita. I was saying that, yeah, just the idea of what you were saying about the fact that when you the central theme of the book, what you see when you look in the mirror, I think that was something that must have been at least in at the back of your head, in the sense of when each of these stories was shaping,
Mm.
was that something that kind of was there a question that sort of uh, concerned you, or that's something that you were grappling with, or because each of these stories is definitely about the idea of what who you are, or who you are in front of people versus who you are, you know when you're alone, or when you're looking at yourself and there's no one around kind of figuring out how to
Mm.
bracket you, or how to. So was that something that you commonly thought about, or was that something that was the central motivation behind each of these stories?
I think I've always thought about those things because I came, um, because I kind of gained recognition pretty early in my life, and there were all these voices on the internet saying all kinds of different things. So, social media has been a big part of me growing up and becoming my own person. And so, we always talk about it. I have a book club that we pick a book every month, and then we talk about it. And then we always come back to social media because it is such a, like before we used to have this log kya kahenge thing where we're always like told by our parents that it's all about society and how they think and what are they going to
Mhm.
say about this or that. But now all those, you don't even have to go leave your house for people to judge you, and like it happens all the time. So then people start portraying themselves a different way, and then it just adds layers and layers of just these like different filters on you so that you
Yeah.
appear different. And then the other thing is that we see that everybody wants to be like everybody else at this point. Like everybody just wants to follow the same trends and then look exactly the same. But then what happens in the end? Like at the end of the day when you come home and then you wash the day off and you look at yourself in the mirror, like who are you? And that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So it is about society, it's about social media and all of these
Mhm.
things, because last year we basically spent, like I was alone most of the year, so I was just uh, here with the internet. And so it's it's so like interesting and weird that we put so much importance to social media and what people think of us. And I think it's very sad to see, honestly, that a lot of people, it's not that you share glimpses of your life on social media. It's like you create things so that you do things so that you can share it on social media. So like all of those things
Yeah.
that I was thinking about. So it was really like a question of what are all these different people, like who are they when they're by themselves, and like how do they sleep, and like what do they see when they look in the mirror. So like it's kind of like a mix of all of those different things, but it's not
Yeah.
like made super obvious, and like I'm not trying to be preachy about it. I'm not trying to uh, act like I know best at all. So like all of these are stories, and all of these are stories that don't like on the surface they don't talk about
Yeah.
those things. They just like exist. So
Yeah.
it's much more subtle. It's a lot of it is in the subtext. It's not really an essay. It's a collection of
Yeah, no,
stories.
I guess that is very true because I feel like this book, we're going to take some questions now, but
Mhm.
before that, I just want to say that I think this is one of those books that you can maybe have two different readings like in the sense that,
Mhm.
the first time you maybe take in a story, you'll take in the story for the way it's paced, and you take it for the story itself,
Mhm.
the pleasure of reading a good story. And I feel like if you just kind of dig a little deeper, all of these things kind of start coming out. If for a story maybe like something, right in the beginning about the couple, I'm not going to give much of it away because I feel like that story has twists in it. But the thing is, the first time you read it, you think you read it like a story, and then maybe the
Mhm.
next time you read it, all of these questions start. You can probably have an entire. I mean, I think this is a great book club book, because
Mhm.
this is the kind of thing that you can debate really with people. Like everyone comes reading the same story, and you're kind of talking about it, and everyone's probably taken away a different meaning or a different, subtext or different kind of, uh, you know, lesson or what something from it. So I feel like
Mhm.
that, I think that's the sign of a good story, that, it starts, the more you peel the layers, the bigger it grows. So it's no longer contained in the pages that's written on, but it just becomes something more. So I feel
Yeah.
like every story in that collection, I think people are going to figure out is that. But let's go to the questions. I'm going to see. Okay, so we've got, I think the first one, will your next book be a collection of short stories or a novel?
I think it's going to be neither. I don't want to like give away too much, but it is something that I've been struggling to work on for many years. But
Right?
uh, now that this book is done, I I took a break. I went to New York for a couple months, and then I went home. So now that I'm back, I'm actually recollecting all my thoughts, and then I might sit down and do it this time. Who knows? But if it doesn't happen, then I'll put that book on hold again, which I've been doing for years, and then go back to writing something else
Yeah.
that I can publish. So I'm writing that book not with the intention of publishing it
Hmm.
right now. I haven't talked to anyone, so we'll see.
Right. Okay, so the next question, I don't know if we have time for more, but I'm just going to ask one more. Which is your favorite story from what you see when you look at? I was also curious about this, honestly. Do you have a favorite
I think it's the
story?
first one. I put it right in the beginning. I was like, there you go. If you don't read anything else, read the first one and then just leave the book. That's enough for me. I
Oh, okay.
It's called Together Forever. I had this idea for a very long time that this is a couple that when they're young they decide that they're going to die together because neither of them can live with the idea that the other person will have to grieve for them. So but then when the time comes, one of them isn't ready, and like, what happens then? And then there are so many different twists and turns, and then we had so many different endings. We talked about it with I talked about it with so many friends, and I had so many different crazy ideas, and like a lot could be done. Um, and then we finally ended up doing this ending, and it's not just the ending, even like how you get there. There are so many different twists and
Yeah.
turns, and there's like so much emotion to it, but at the same time it's so fun. Like it's a great first story, and it like sets,
Yeah.
as soon as the reader picks up the book and reads the first story, they're like, okay, this is
Yeah.
I
I
should be
mean,
prepared.
that one line pitch, I remember when you had sent a bit of, a few lines about what each story would be like. I think the whole
Mhm.
full collection was complete then, but I think this was one of the first ones that you'd sent.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a story about, and I remember thinking right then, I remember discussing it, with my publisher, and I was like, okay, this is great because this one line pitch itself could be an entire. I mean, I can visualize it as a short story, as a whole movie, as a,
Mhm.
it's just that it hits you quite hard. I feel like it's a great first story. You're right, and also
Thank you.
it's an instant it's a great gateway into the rest of the book, right? Because each of these stories has these kind of difficult decisions and difficult kind of things that are happening in the characters' lives. Even something like a watering can, I get that it's about a young kid, but for him, this is a very huge problem that he's facing in that story. So I feel like,
The
to,
stakes are
to tell
very
you
high
guys,
for
exactly, it's in his small world, in the world, in the little time that he spent in the world, that's a big problem. Guys, this is a story about a young kid who's taking care of plants, and he just can't figure out why they won't grow
yeah.
the way he wants them to
So he
grow. And
does
it's
the same thing for both plants, and then
yeah,
one of them is thriving and the other one's just shedding leaves
yeah.
every day. And then he
So
like tapes them back together with Fevicol and like all this stuff.
yeah. It's really, I mean, I remember being so like, I mean, it's just such an endearing sort of like story. So all of them are very different, I think, in that way. So I feel like, yeah, you're right. It is a great first story, because I think it gives you a picture of what you're doing. And it's also, I mean, format again is experimental, and what it does, is experimental. So yeah, I mean, it's a great, let me see if I think, I'm not sure if we have, okay, we've got one last question. Which story was the most difficult to write? Let's end with this, actually. It's a tough question.
The most difficult to write would be the last story because it's called Guru, and it's a letter that I wrote to my teacher. Um, because I had this one teacher that always kind of believed in me for no reason. Like I don't think I displayed any kind of special talent, but he would tell me and he would tell everyone that, I was gonna do something someday, and I was like, okay, and it was so it's like really emotional to be. To write that story, and yeah, it's not very long, it's a few pages, but it's a letter, and I cry every day. Not every day, but every time I read it.
Did you get a chance to send this letter to your teacher? Did you actually send it and then put it in the book, or was it the other way around?
So I'm sending a few books to a few different people. So I've signed copies and I've left them at
Yeah,
home. And my brother, I'm going to
he's
nag
going
him
to
to
ship
send
it
it
out.
to people. Yeah. So yeah,
Oh,
that
I'm
was the
excited
idea
for your
that once the
teacher.
book is published, I would send it to him. Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be such a nice thing to receive, right? Not just a book by a student, but also like a letter
Yeah.
for you inside that book. It's just going to be, yeah, it's going to
Yeah,
be
I could
fabulous.
cry thinking about it right now. Very
Yeah,
emotional.
it is lovely. I think, yeah, we are just 3 minutes ahead of the time we were given. So I feel like this has been a lovely and productive and also contained chat. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
talking to us, Nikita. And yeah, guys, it's a lovely book. Like I said, I mean, there's so much fodder here to discuss. So definitely.